Caspar Domingos cursed under his breath as his ship rattled violently, hurtling through the thick atmosphere of Zarnath 7. Flames licked the edges of his cracked viewport, casting a fiery glow over the barren control panel. His systems had failed hours ago, and all that remained was the hope that the emergency protocols would engage. With a deafening crash, the ship slammed into the swampy surface, sending waves of glowing, bioluminescent water rippling outward. The cabin was dark except for the soft flicker of red warning lights. Caspar unclipped his harness, his hands trembling, and pried open the warped hatch. The humid air hit him like a wall, thick with the scent of alien flora and damp earth. He stepped out, his boots sinking into the soft, marshy ground. Caspar activated the scanning module on his wrist, hoping to identify something, anything, familiar in the alien landscape. His surroundings were eerily beautiful, illuminated by plants that glowed in shifting hues of blue, green, and purple. Strange calls echoed in the distance, the sounds unfamiliar and unsettling. He was alone on this planet, or so he thought. Hours passed as he trudged through the swamp, his energy reserves dwindling. The feeling of being watched crept into his mind, making him pause every few steps. He dismissed it as paranoia until he heard it, a faint rustling in the distance, the crunch of leaves underfoot. Caspar spun around, pulse weapon drawn, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw nothing but the pulsating glow of alien vegetation. The silence that followed was deafening, the swamp seemingly holding its breath. Before he could react, a figure lunged from the shadows, tackling him to the ground. Caspar struggled, his breath knocked out of him as he hit the wet earth. His vision blurred momentarily, but when it cleared, he froze. A woman, no, a creature, pinned him beneath her weight. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent blue glow, and her golden eyes seemed to pierce his very soul. Her long, sharp ears twitched with every sound, and her voice, when she spoke, was both melodic and menacing. "You're slow, human," she said, her accent strange yet oddly captivating. "Too slow to survive here." Caspar tried to wriggle free, but her strength was overwhelming. She tightened her grip, her gaze unrelenting. "What do you want?" he gasped, his voice strained. The alien woman tilted her head as if studying him, her expression unreadable. "Your kind is weak. But perhaps you can be of some use." With a swift motion, she tore open the front of his suit, exposing his sweat-drenched chest to the cool, alien air. Caspar's protests fell on deaf ears as she pressed her glowing fingers to his skin. An intense surge of energy coursed through his body, leaving him both terrified and exhilarated. What are you doing to me?" he managed to choke out. She leaned closer, her golden eyes narrowing. "Testing you. My people feed on energy. You are insufficient." Her words were laced with disdain, but there was something else, curiosity, perhaps. Caspar felt his pulse quicken, his mind racing. He had survived countless missions, but nothing had prepared him for this. The alien woman released him and stood, her movements fluid and graceful. Caspar scrambled to his feet, his weapon still in hand, though he doubted it would do much against her. She crossed her arms, watching him with a mix of amusement and frustration. "You won't last a day here," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "But I can change that. If you want to live, you'll follow me." Caspar hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run. But where would he go? He was stranded on an unknown planet with no way of contacting his fleet. The woman turned and began walking away, her confidence evident in every step. "Decide quickly," she called over her shoulder. "The predators here are far less forgiving than I am." Reluctantly, Caspar followed, his grip tightening on his weapon. He didn't trust her, but she was his only chance at survival. As they moved deeper into the swamp, the glow of the plants dimmed, and the air grew colder. Caspar's exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but he forced himself to keep up. The alien woman finally stopped at a clearing where massive, glowing trees formed a natural canopy. "Rest," she commanded, gesturing to a dry patch of ground. Tomorrow, your training begins. Casper collapsed onto the ground, his body aching and his mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? What did she mean by training? And why had she spared him? As he drifted into a restless sleep, Casper couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something far bigger than himself. The alien woman's golden eyes haunted his thoughts, a mixture of threat and intrigue. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but one thing was certain, his survival depended on her, whether he liked it or not. Casper woke to the strange hum of the alien swamp, a chorus of rhythmic sounds that seemed to pulse in harmony with the glowing flora. The events of the previous day came rushing back as he sat up, his muscles sore and his mind fogged by exhaustion. The alien woman stood a few feet away, her golden eyes scanning the surroundings with a vigilance that made him feel like a child in the presence of a seasoned warrior. Her movements were deliberate, her posture exuding both grace and readiness. She noticed him stirring and turned her attention toward him. "You're awake," she said, her tone devoid of warmth but not entirely hostile. "Good. We begin now." Casper frowned, brushing the damp soil from his suit as he rose to his feet. "Begin what?" he asked, his voice still groggy. The woman stepped closer, towering over him with an air of authority. "Your training," she said. "You are weak, physically, mentally. If you're going to survive, that has to change." Casper clenched his fists, bristling at her bluntness. "I've survived plenty before this," he countered, his tone defensive. The woman raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of skepticism and amusement. "Not here. Zarnath 7 is a predator's paradise. Everything either hunts or adapts. You are neither." She gestured to a large, flat rock nearby, her sharp features illuminated by the bioluminescent glow of the swamp. "Sit." Reluctantly, Casper obeyed, watching as she retrieved a small, glowing device from her belt. She activated it with a flick of her wrist, and a holographic display emerged, depicting the planet's flora and fauna in vivid detail. "This is what you're up against," she explained, pointing to a writhing, multi-limbed creature with razor-sharp mandibles. "The Kothari. They hunt in packs, and their venom can paralyze a full-grown Zenarii in seconds." She swiped to another image, this one of a towering beast with glowing eyes and scales that shimmered like polished obsidian. "The Crawl. Territorial, aggressive, and nearly impervious to most weapons. You wouldn't last 10 seconds against one." Casper's stomach tightened as she continued, each creature more terrifying than the last. "What about you?" he asked, interrupting her grim lesson. "You seem to know your way around. Why help me? Why not leave me to fend for myself?" The woman's golden eyes met his, and for a moment, there was something almost human in her gaze. "Because I need you alive," she said simply. "Your energy is different from anything I've encountered. It's untamed. If you die, I lose that. So, until you're strong enough to stand on your own, I'll train you." Casper wanted to press further, but her expression made it clear the conversation was over. She motioned for him to follow, and they began their first training session. The swamp was treacherous, its terrain shifting between slippery moss-covered rocks and thick, sinking mud. Casper struggled to keep up as the woman moved effortlessly through the environment, her agility and strength on full display. She stopped abruptly and pointed to a cluster of glowing vines that hung from a towering tree. "Climb," she commanded. Casper stared at the vines, his hands already aching at the thought. "You're kidding, right?" he said, but the sharp look she gave him silenced any further protest. He reached for the nearest vine and began to pull himself up, his muscles protesting with every movement. The woman watched silently, her arms crossed. By the time Casper reached the top, his arms felt like they were on fire, and his breath came in ragged gasps. He looked down to see the woman climbing effortlessly behind him, her movements fluid and precise. She reached the top in seconds and crouched on the branch beside him, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. "Your form is terrible," she said, not unkindly. But at least you didn't fall. Caspar rolled his eyes, too exhausted to argue. She handed him a small fruit she had plucked from a nearby branch. It glowed faintly, its surface smooth and cool to the touch. Eat, she said. It'll help. Caspar hesitated, but the hunger gnawing at his stomach won out. He bit into the fruit, surprised by its sweetness. Almost immediately, he felt a surge of energy course through him, his exhaustion fading. The day continued in much the same way, with the woman pushing Caspar to his limits. She made him run through the swamp, climb steep cliffs, and wade through waist-deep water filled with unseen dangers. Each time he faltered, she was there, her sharp commands and unwavering presence driving him forward. By the time they returned to their makeshift camp, Caspar was drenched in sweat, his body aching in ways he hadn't thought possible. He collapsed onto the ground, too tired to care about the damp earth beneath him. The woman sat across from him, her expression unreadable as she tended to her weapon. You did better than I expected, she said, her tone almost approving. Caspar managed a weak laugh. High praise, he muttered, closing his eyes. She didn't respond, but he could feel her gaze on him, as if she were evaluating him, not just as a trainee but as something more. For the first time since crash landing on this planet, Caspar felt a flicker of hope. It was small and fragile, but it was enough to keep him going. As the night fell and the swamp was bathed in the eerie glow of bioluminescent plants, Caspar found himself wondering about his enigmatic companion. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, human or otherwise. There was strength in her, but also something deeper, something she kept hidden behind her sharp words and piercing gaze. He didn't know what the coming days would bring, but one thing was certain, he wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to prove himself, not just to her but to himself. Caspar's body ached as he woke to the sound of faint rustling in the swamp. The eerie symphony of the alien wilderness had become oddly familiar, though no less unsettling. He sat up, his limbs protesting the movement, and glanced around the clearing. Liera was already awake, standing near the edge of the camp with her back to him. She was sharpening a blade made from a strange metallic material, its edges glowing faintly in the dim light. Caspar found himself studying her, her movements precise, her posture exuding confidence. She seemed invincible, a stark contrast to his own battered state. Without turning, she spoke. You'll need to move faster today. Caspar sighed, already dreading whatever grueling tasks awaited him. You say that like I had a choice yesterday, he muttered, his voice still groggy. Liera finally turned to face him, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. You're improving, but not quickly enough. The predators here won't wait for you to catch up. Her tone was firm, but there was a hint of something else, concern, perhaps. Caspar couldn't be sure. As they set off through the swamp, the air felt heavier than usual, thick with the promise of danger. Liera moved like a shadow, her steps silent and deliberate. Caspar did his best to mimic her, though his boots squelched noisily in the mud. He could feel her disapproval without needing to look. They came to a halt near a shallow stream, its water glowing faintly from the bioluminescent organisms within. Drink, Liera said, crouching down. Caspar hesitated, eyeing the water warily. Is it safe? She shot him an unimpressed glance. If it wasn't, I wouldn't drink it. Taking her lead, he knelt and cupped the cool water in his hands, the faint glow washing over his skin. It tasted surprisingly fresh, and he felt a renewed sense of energy as he drank. The moment of reprieve didn't last long. As they crossed the stream, a low growl echoed from the trees ahead. Caspar froze, his pulse quickening. What was that? He whispered. Liera's ears twitched, her hand moving to the hilt of her blade. Katheri, she said, her voice barely audible. They found us. Caspar's mouth went dry as she gestured for him to follow her lead. The growling grew louder, accompanied by the rustling of leaves. Caspar caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of dark, sleek fur and glinting eyes. Without warning, a Kothari leapt from the shadows, its razor-sharp mandibles snapping dangerously close to Caspar's face. He stumbled backward, raising his weapon, but Liera was faster. She darted forward, her blade slicing through the air with precision. The creature let out a piercing screech as it fell, its body collapsing in a heap. "Stay close," Liera barked, her eyes scanning the trees. More growls echoed around them, a chilling reminder that the Kothari rarely hunted alone. Caspar gripped his weapon tightly, his hands slick with sweat. He had faced danger before, but nothing like this. The Kothari were relentless, their sleek bodies darting through the underbrush with terrifying speed. Liera moved like a force of nature, her blade a blur as she struck down one creature after another. Caspar did his best to keep up, his pulse weapon firing bursts of energy that lit up the swamp. Each shot felt like a gamble, his aim shaky under the pressure. As the last Kothari fell, the swamp fell silent once more. Caspar leaned against a tree, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Liera stood nearby, her blade dripping with the creature's iridescent blood. "You hesitated," she said, her tone sharp. Caspar glared at her, his frustration bubbling over. "I'm not a warrior like you," he snapped. "I'm just trying to survive." Liera stepped closer, her golden eyes locking onto his. "Survival isn't enough," she said, her voice softer now. "You have to adapt. The Kothari won't give you a second chance." Her words stung, but Caspar couldn't deny their truth. He had been lucky this time, but luck wouldn't save him forever. As they continued their journey, he resolved to do better, to push himself harder. The swamp grew darker as they ventured deeper, the glowing plants casting eerie shadows. Caspar could feel the weight of the planet pressing down on him, its dangers lurking around every corner. Hours later, they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a wide expanse of shimmering water. The view was breathtaking, the bioluminescent lake stretching out like a sea of stars. Liera sat down on a nearby boulder, her expression thoughtful. "This planet tests everyone," she said after a long silence. "Even me. It's why I left my people. They cling to old ways, traditions that make them weak. But you're different. You have potential." Caspar sat beside her, surprised by her candor. "You don't know me," he said quietly. "Not really." She turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "I know enough. You've survived this long, even when you were outmatched. That means something." For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sounds the gentle lapping of the lake and the distant calls of alien creatures. Caspar felt a strange sense of calm, a fleeting reprieve from the chaos of the day. But beneath it all, he couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The Kothari were just the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, he would need to be ready. As the night deepened, Liera stood and extended a hand to Caspar. "Come," she said. "We still have a long way to go." He took her hand, her grip firm and steady. Together, they descended from the outcrop, the glow of the lake fading behind them. Caspar didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't the same man who had crash-landed on this planet. And he wasn't fighting alone anymore. The next morning came swiftly, though Caspar's body begged for more rest. Every muscle felt like it had been dragged through the swamp twice, yet Liera's voice cut through the haze of fatigue like a blade. "Up. We don't have time for weakness." He groaned but obeyed, pulling himself to his feet with a wince. She stood a few paces away, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. The air was cooler now, the swamp's perpetual humidity tempered by a faint breeze. It felt like the calm before a storm. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the terrain began to shift. The soft, swampy ground gave way to jagged rocks and sharp inclines. Caspar found himself struggling to keep up, his boots slipping on the uneven surface. Liera, on the other hand, moved with the grace of a predator, her steps light and precise. She paused at the base of a steep cliff, her gaze fixed on a cluster of caves that dotted the rock face. "We'll climb," she said, motioning to the nearest path. Caspar stared up at the sheer rock wall, his stomach sinking. "You can't be serious," he muttered, but the look she gave him left no room for argument. The climb was brutal, every handhold and foothold a test of endurance. The rock was sharp and unyielding, scraping his palms and tearing at his suit. Liera moved ahead with ease, her lithe form navigating the ascent as if she'd done it 100 times before. Caspar gritted his teeth and pushed forward, determined not to fall behind. By the time he reached the top, his arms were trembling, and his breath came in shallow gasps. He collapsed onto the rocky surface, his chest heaving. "This better be worth it," he panted. Liera didn't respond immediately. She stood at the edge of the cliff, her posture tense, her ears twitching slightly. "They're close," she said finally, her voice low. Caspar sat up, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Who?" She turned to him, her expression grim. "The Thalnox." The name sent a chill down his spine. He had heard of them in passing, a race of relentless conquerors who destroyed anything in their path. "How do you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She gestured to the horizon, where a faint red glow flickered in the distance. "That's their signal. They're hunting." Caspar's heart raced as he processed her words. "So, what do we do?" he asked, trying to keep the panic from his voice. Liera's golden eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something resembling uncertainty. "We fight," she said simply. "But first, we prepare." She turned and began rummaging through a satchel she had carried up the cliff, pulling out an assortment of crude weapons and tools. Caspar watched as she worked, her movements quick and efficient. "What exactly are we preparing for?" he asked, his voice laced with unease. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Survival." The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Liera showed him how to reinforce their position, using the natural features of the cliff to create makeshift barriers and traps. She handed him a blade fashioned from a strange, glowing metal and demonstrated how to use it effectively. "Strike fast and don't hesitate," she instructed, her tone as sharp as the weapon. "The Thalnox won't give you a second chance." Caspar nodded, his grip tightening on the blade. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the realization that his survival depended on his ability to fight. As night fell, the tension in the air became almost palpable. The faint red glow on the horizon had grown brighter, a sinister beacon that signaled the approach of their enemies. Caspar sat by the edge of the cliff, his weapon resting across his lap. He stared out at the dark expanse of the swamp, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of fear and determination. Liera joined him, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. "They'll be here soon," she said, her voice quiet. Caspar turned to her, searching for some hint of reassurance. "Have you fought them before?" he asked. She nodded, her expression hardening. "Many times. They're relentless, but they're not invincible." The first sign of the Thalnox arrival was the sound, a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. Caspar's grip tightened on his weapon as the noise grew louder, accompanied by the faint flicker of red lights in the distance. Liera stood, her posture rigid, her blade gleaming in the moonlight. "Stay close to me," she said, her voice firm. "And remember what I taught you." The Thalnox emerged from the darkness like shadows given form, their towering figures illuminated by the faint red glow of their weapons. They were monstrous, their black scales glinting in the dim light, their eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. Caspar felt his stomach drop as he took in the sheer size of them, their presence both terrifying and overwhelming. Liera moved first, her blade slicing through the air with precision. Caspar followed, his heart pounding as he engaged the nearest enemy. The battle was chaotic, every moment a blur of movement and sound. Caspar fought with a desperation he hadn't known he possessed, his blade cutting through the air as he parried and struck. Liera was a whirlwind of motion, her attacks swift and deadly. Despite their efforts, the Thalnox pressed forward, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm them. Caspar felt his strength waning, his movements growing slower as exhaustion set in. Just when it seemed the battle was lost, a deafening roar echoed through the night. Caspar turned to see one of the traps Liera had set earlier spring into action, a massive boulder crashing down and taking out several Thalnox at once. The tide began to turn, the traps buying them precious moments to regroup. Caspar and Liera fought side by side, their movements synchronized in a way that felt almost instinctive. When the last Thalnox fell, the swamp fell silent once more. Caspar dropped to his knees, his chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion. Liera stood beside him, her blade dripping with blood, her golden eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. "We survived," Caspar said, his voice barely audible. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "For now." As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Caspar felt a strange mix of relief and dread. They had won the battle, but he knew the war was far from over. The Thalnox would return, stronger and more determined than before. And when they did, Caspar would be ready. The morning sun cast its faint light over the alien landscape, a soft glow that did little to warm the chill seeping into Caspar's bones. He sat at the edge of the cliff, gazing at the aftermath of the battle. The swamp below was littered with the dark, motionless forms of the Thalnox, their blood staining the ground in unnatural hues. Caspar's body ached with every movement, his muscles stiff and bruised. He had survived, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on his mind. Liera stood nearby, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. She seemed untouched by the exhaustion that gripped Caspar, her posture as strong and commanding as ever. "They'll come again," she said, her voice breaking the heavy silence. Caspar turned to her, his expression grim. "How many more waves do you think there will be?" She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "As many as it takes for them to achieve their goal. The Thalnox don't stop until everything in their path is destroyed." Caspar leaned back against the rock, letting out a heavy sigh. "Then why don't we run? Find someplace safer." Liera finally turned to him, her expression hard. "Because there is no safe place. They'll hunt us down no matter where we go. Our only chance is to stand and fight." Her words hit him like a hammer, the finality of their situation sinking in. There was no escape, no running from this relentless enemy. The only path forward was through them. Liera crouched beside him, her gaze softening slightly. "I know this isn't what you signed up for, human, but you've proven yourself stronger than I expected. You've come this far, don't give up now." Caspar looked at her, surprised by the rare hint of encouragement in her voice. He nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'm not giving up. Not now." The hours that followed were spent preparing for the inevitable. Liera led Caspar to a nearby cave system, its narrow passages providing a natural fortress. Together, they worked to fortify the entrance, using whatever materials they could find to create barriers and traps. Caspar's hands were blistered and raw by the time they finished, but he pushed through the pain, driven by the knowledge that their survival depended on their efforts. As they worked, Liera began to open up, her sharp edges softening in fleeting moments of vulnerability. She told Caspar about the Zenarii, her people, and their long-standing conflict with the Thalnox. "We were once a proud and powerful race," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But arrogance blinded us. We thought we were invincible, and by the time we realized the threat the Thalnox posed, it was too late. They destroyed our cities, scattered our people. Now, we're little more than survivors, fighting to hold on to what's left." Caspar listened in silence, his respect for Liera growing with each word. She wasn't just a warrior, she was a survivor, carrying the weight of her people's failure on her shoulders. He wondered how she managed to keep going, to keep fighting, when the odds seemed so insurmountable. "Why do you keep fighting?" he asked, his voice quiet. Why not give up and let them win? Liera's golden eyes met his, her gaze fierce. Because giving up means accepting that they've already won. And I refuse to let that happen. Her words resonated with Casper, igniting a spark of determination within him. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore, he was fighting for something greater, something worth risking everything for. As night fell, the tension in the air grew palpable. The Thalnok's guttural hum echoed faintly in the distance, a chilling reminder that the enemy was closing in. Casper and Liera took up positions near the cave entrance, their weapons ready. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, every shadow a potential threat. Casper's grip on his blade tightened as the hum grew louder, the sound vibrating through the stone walls of the cave. When the first Thalnok appeared, its massive form illuminated by the faint red glow of its weapon, Casper felt his heart race. Liera moved first, her blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Casper followed, his movements more confident than before. The battle was brutal, the Thalnoks relentless in their assault. But this time, Casper was ready. He fought with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed, each strike fueled by a newfound sense of purpose. The hours stretched on as the battle raged, the cave echoing with the sounds of clashing weapons and guttural roars. Casper and Liera fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized. Despite the odds, they held their ground, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. Casper could feel the shift within himself, a transformation that went beyond physical strength. He was no longer just a survivor, he was a warrior. As the first light of dawn began to filter into the cave, the Thalnoks retreated, their numbers decimated. Casper collapsed against the cave wall, his chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion. Liera knelt beside him, her golden eyes softening as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did well," she said, her voice quiet. Casper managed a weak smile, his heart swelling with pride at her words. But as they surveyed the aftermath of the battle, Casper couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of unease that lingered in the back of his mind. The Thalnoks had been pushed back, but they would return. And next time, they would be stronger. "What now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Liera's gaze hardened, her resolve unshaken. "Now, we prepare for the final stand." Casper woke to the sound of distant thunder, though he knew it wasn't natural. The Thalnoks were preparing for their next assault, and every moment felt like borrowed time. He sat up slowly, his muscles still aching from the last battle. Liera was already awake, sharpening her blade near the cave entrance. Her golden eyes flickered to him briefly before returning to her work. "Today, we finish what they started," she said, her tone resolute. Casper stood, brushing the dust from his suit. "You say that like it's a certainty," he replied, his voice tinged with both determination and doubt. Liera glanced at him, her expression softening just enough to show she understood his unease. "It is. We fight together, and together we'll endure." The hours leading up to the battle were spent reinforcing their defenses and gathering whatever resources they could find. The cave had become a fortress, every corner fortified with traps and barriers they had meticulously constructed. Casper found himself working more efficiently, his movements confident and purposeful. He wasn't just following Liera's lead anymore, he was a part of this fight, as vital to their survival as she was. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the swamp in hues of deep orange and purple, Liera joined Casper near the edge of the cave. The bioluminescent plants around them cast an ethereal glow, a stark contrast to the tension in the air. "You've changed," Liera said, her voice softer than usual. Casper turned to her, surprised by the observation. "I've had to," he replied. "This planet doesn't give you much choice." She studied him for a moment, her sharp features softened by the dim light. "It's not just the planet," she said. "You found something inside yourself, a strength you didn't know you had." Casper looked away, unsure how to respond. Her words stirred something within him, a mixture of pride and vulnerability that he wasn't used to feeling. "I've had a good teacher," he said finally, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Liera stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "You're more than a student, Casper. You've become someone I can rely on, someone I trust." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Casper felt his heart quicken, the unspoken bond between them growing stronger with every passing moment. He reached out hesitantly, his hand brushing against hers. Liera didn't pull away. Instead, she met his gaze, her golden eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before, hope. The moment was interrupted by the distant hum of the Thalnox's approach. The sound was low and guttural, growing louder with each passing second. Casper and Liera exchanged a glance, their silent understanding conveying what words couldn't. It was time. They returned to the cave, their movements swift and purposeful. The traps were set, their weapons ready. The tension was palpable as they took their positions, the glow of the swamp casting long shadows across the rocky walls. When the Thalnox arrived, they came in greater numbers than before. Their towering forms emerged from the darkness, illuminated by the red glow of their weapons. Casper's grip tightened on his blade, his breath steady despite the fear coursing through him. Beside him, Liera stood tall, her posture exuding confidence. "Stay close," she said, her voice firm. "We fight as one." The battle erupted in a frenzy of movement and sound, the cave filled with the clash of weapons and the guttural roars of the Thalnox. Casper fought with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed, his blade cutting through the air with precision. Every strike felt purposeful, every movement a testament to how far he had come. Liera was a force of nature, her attacks swift and deadly. Together, they were a whirlwind of chaos, their bond evident in the way they moved and fought as one. As the battle raged on, the traps they had set began to spring into action. Rocks tumbled from the cave walls, crushing Thalnox beneath their weight. Spiked barriers impaled those who ventured too close. But the Thalnox were relentless, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm even their best efforts. Casper felt his strength waning, his movements growing slower as exhaustion set in. In the chaos, Casper noticed a group of Thalnox attempting to breach the deeper parts of the cave. He moved to intercept them, his blade cutting through their ranks with desperate precision. One of the creatures lunged at him, its massive claws raking across his shoulder. He cried out in pain but didn't falter, driving his blade into the creature's chest. As it fell, Casper stumbled back, clutching his wounded shoulder. Liera appeared at his side, her golden eyes filled with concern. "You're hurt," she said, her voice laced with urgency. Casper shook his head, his grip tightening on his weapon. "I'll manage," he replied, his tone resolute. She hesitated for a moment before nodding, her focus returning to the battle. The fight continued into the early hours of the morning, the Thalnox numbers finally beginning to dwindle. When the last of them fell, the cave fell silent once more. Casper leaned against the wall, his body trembling with exhaustion. Liera stood beside him, her blade dripping with the blood of their enemies. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Liera nodded, but her expression remained tense. "This isn't the end," she said. "They'll come back, stronger than before. We need to be ready." Casper met her gaze, his resolve unshaken. "Then we'll fight. Together." As the first light of dawn began to filter into the cave, Casper felt a strange sense of calm. He wasn't the same man who had crash-landed on this planet. He had found strength, purpose, and something else, someone worth fighting for. And no matter what came next, he knew they would face it together. The dawn light filtered weakly into the cave, illuminating the aftermath of the battle. The ground was littered with the remains of the Thalnox, their grotesque forms a stark reminder of the relentless enemy Casper and Liera had faced. Casper sat against the rocky wall, his wounded shoulder wrapped tightly in a makeshift bandage. Every breath was a reminder of how much the fight had taken from him, but the quiet determination in his heart burned brighter than ever. Liera stood at the entrance, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. The glow of the swamp felt dimmer, as though the planet itself had suffered alongside them. She turned to Casper, her expression unreadable. The Thalnox won't stop. This was just another test. The next wave will be stronger, more calculated. They'll bring their full force. Casper nodded, already understanding the gravity of their situation. Then we need a plan. Something bigger than just holding this cave. Liera hesitated, her sharp features softening. There's one option, she said finally. The core of Zarnath 7, the energy that sustains this planet, can be used as a weapon. It's dangerous, but it could wipe out the Thalnox. Casper frowned, his mind racing. And what happens to us? Liera's gaze faltered for a moment before meeting his. If we fail to contain it, the core will take us with it. The weight of her words settled heavily between them. Casper rose slowly, his body protesting the movement, and crossed the distance to her. If this is our only chance, then we take it. I'm not letting them win. Liera studied him, her golden eyes searching his face. You're willing to risk everything? Casper nodded, his resolve unwavering. For you, for this planet, for the chance that we might actually stop them, yes. Without another word, Liera led him deeper into the cave system. The passages grew narrower, the air heavier with every step. The bioluminescent plants gave way to glowing veins of crystalline energy embedded in the rock, their light pulsating like a heartbeat. Casper could feel the power radiating from them, a constant hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest. This is the source, Liera said, stopping before a massive chamber. At its center was a towering crystal, its light shifting between colors in mesmerizing waves. The core of Zarnath 7. Casper stared at the crystal, awe and fear mingling in his chest. How do we use it? Liera moved to a console embedded in the rock, its surface covered in alien symbols. I can overload it, but it will take time. You'll need to protect me while I work. Casper nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. I've got your back. The hum of the core grew louder as Liera began her work, her fingers moving deftly over the console. Casper positioned himself at the entrance to the chamber, his senses on high alert. It didn't take long for the Thalnox to arrive. The first wave was smaller than he expected, likely scouts sent to assess the situation. Casper dispatched them quickly, his movements fueled by a combination of adrenaline and determination. But the second wave was different. Larger, more organized, and armed with weapons that glowed ominously in the dim light. Casper gritted his teeth, his blade slicing through the air as he fought to hold the line. Liera worked tirelessly behind him, her focus unbroken despite the chaos unfolding around her. Almost there, she shouted over the din of battle. Casper's body screamed in protest as he fought, every movement a battle against his own exhaustion. The Thalnox pressed harder, their numbers seemingly endless. Just when it felt like he couldn't hold on any longer, a deafening hum filled the chamber. The core's light grew brighter, its colors shifting rapidly. It's done. Liera yelled, her voice cutting through the noise. Get to the exit, now. Casper turned to her, his heart sinking. What about you? Liera shook her head, her expression resolute. I need to stay to ensure the detonation is controlled. Go. Casper hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to refuse. I'm not leaving you, he shouted, his voice breaking. Liera stepped closer, her golden eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. You have to. You're the one who can carry this fight forward. Trust me, Casper. Tears burned in his eyes as he nodded, the weight of the moment threatening to crush him. He turned and ran, his legs moving on pure instinct as the chamber began to quake. The glow of the core intensified, its light flooding the cave system as he reached the surface. He looked back, his heart aching with every step, but he knew there was no time to hesitate. The explosion rocked the swamp, a blinding light consuming everything in its path. The force of it knocked Casper to the ground, his vision blurring as the shockwave rippled through the air. When the light faded, all that remained was silence. Casper sat up slowly, his body trembling. The cave was gone, replaced by a massive crater that glowed faintly with the remnants of the core's energy. His chest tightened as he stared at the devastation, his mind racing with the memory of Liara's final words. She was gone, but her sacrifice had saved him, saved the planet. As the swamp began to recover, the bioluminescent plants returning to life, Casper stood and gazed at the horizon. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: Liara's legacy would live on through him. Her strength, her courage, and her hope had changed him forever. With renewed determination, Casper turned and began his journey, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a warrior, and he would honor Liara's memory by fighting for the peace she had given everything to achieve.